Right, so what we're going to do now is we're going to talk about outdoor ethics. And the reason outdoor ethics are so important that we need to cover them is because as you're going outside and you're doing your activities, as you're doing nature crafts and you're using materials that come from nature, it's important to know what your ethical code is. What are you willing to collect? What are you not willing to collect, and why? So let's talk a little bit about what outdoor ethics actually means. So outdoor ethics is basically our beliefs, values, and actions toward natural environments. And what it means is that basically we're treating the land today so that it can be used again tomorrow. It's this idea that we're borrowing the land from our children and that we want them to have access to the same wild spaces and the same natural resources that we have today. And so we act accordingly. We are respectful of things outdoors. We don't collect more than we need, things like that. And we actually, well, I have kind of put together these 4 arbitrary categories that help describe different ethical codes in the outdoors to help you understand maybe a little bit where you are at. So I'm going to go through these 4 codes. It's the purist, the biologist, the hunter, and the civilian. So let's start with the purist. The purist is basically the purest form of outdoor ethic, right? And many people call this leave no trace. You can easily Google it and learn more about it online. And basically it's this idea that take only pictures, leave only footprints. That you take nothing with you and you're only there for the experience of the natural world and you leave the smallest footprint possible. If you've never heard of outdoor ethics, this is probably the best place that you should start. So the second category that I have is called the biologist, and this is actually the outdoor ethic that I relate the most to, and that is because I believe in the purest outdoor ethical code, and I practice that as often as possible. However, there are also instances where we need to learn a little bit more about nature, and you can't necessarily do that from a picture, and you can't necessarily do that from afar. So I do believe that on occasion it is worth collecting objects. So for example, we collect insects really frequently, especially during the summer, right? And we'll put them in little jars and we'll keep them for a day or two, we'll feed them, we'll observe their behaviors, and then we'll let them go. And so this just gives us an opportunity to get to know nature just a little bit more intimately, and it works well for our family. Your family may do perfectly well going outside and taking pictures and sticking with the purist ethic, and that is okay too. All right, the next category that we have is the hunter. And the reason that I put this in here is because, at least in the United States, I'm not sure about other countries, but in the US, people who buy hunting and fishing license are the primary contributors to conservation funds in the US. So if you are out there buying hunting and fishing licenses, then you're the reason that we have conservation efforts for the most part, that our state parks are working to conserve natural resources and all that. So the vast majority of funds used for conservation in the US comes from people who hunt and fish. And so that's why I mentioned that, because a lot of people think that hunters and fishers are these people that go out and they use nature in excess. That's not necessarily true. Hunters and fishers tend to follow the guidelines. They can only collect so many of a certain species, and even among that certain species, so many of the males and the females. And these are all dictated by biologists who are studying the natural environment. They know what can be collected more and what needs to be collected less. What needs to be collected in order to maintain the population. Because as humans, right, we've kind of done away with a lot of the apex predators. And so hunting allows us to control populations of deer and to prevent huge outbreaks of disease. So hunting is not a bad thing. It's actually a management strategy by biologists to control populations in the environment. Plus, hunters and fishers contribute a lot to conservation. And lastly, we have the civilian ethic. And so this may be where a lot of you are. You may be sitting here thinking, I didn't even know there's such a thing as an outdoor ethic, much less that I'm on one side of the scale or the other, and that's okay. maybe you went out collecting wildflowers with your kids and you made a huge bouquet, right? And put it on the picnic table at your campsite. And again, it's okay. Now we just know that that's probably not the best idea, right? Because wildflowers, I mean, they need those flowers for reproduction. Animals need those flowers for food sources. And so by taking those away, you're having an impact on the environment. And really, in the end, all that you get a little bit of joy out of it. I mean, I love wildflowers too, right? By them sitting on your picnic table. But in the end, the ecosystem needs them more. So instead, what do? You clip flowers from your flower garden instead of wildflowers. And so there's just these changes that you can make. So if you recognize that you probably are a civilian, then hop on over to the Purist group and try to focus more on taking pictures and leaving footprints and maybe collecting a thing or two like the Biologist ethic, but not too much. So there's one thing I want to mention. You're not maybe going to solely be in one category or another. You might, but a lot of us kind of exist in between, and that's okay. It's an ethical code, right? Which ethics exists on a gradient. And so it really just depends on what you really identify with. And if you go through the and download the worksheet below and just kind of work through it and see where you are. And we'd love to hear about it on the Facebook group. So your action step is to download the workbook, answer the questions, identify which outdoor ethic you really identify with the most, and then post it online. We'd love to hear it. Okay, thanks.